this, I believe, is the key misunderstanding, is that we feel that if we let go, we can't have what we want. That unless we cling and strive and grasp, we won't get anywhere. When in fact, often the opposite is the case. The attitude of letting go is an attitude of freedom. It's about continually freeing ourselves from what no longer serves us. And this is a lot more than what we often realize. So let's take difficult emotions, for example. How often do we hold on to anger or resentment over something that happened in the past? And what type of effects do these feelings have in our lives? Sure, sometimes we need time to process these feelings, to integrate them, or sometimes we need time to grieve. Sometimes we need to be able to learn from the past, but we also need to be able to move on. Otherwise, they become a burden that we carry around like an emotional baggage that causes us to relive the same suffering over and over again. It's as if we grasp things, we hold on to them so tightly out of a fear of letting go. Sometimes we might fear that out of a sense of righteousness, that unless we hold on to the anger or the resentment, we will not be able to have justice. And so we keep grasping, we keep holding on, and over time this becomes part of our identity. We come to identify with these feelings, and we eventually forget that we are clenching our fists. It's like the saying goes that it's as if we hold on to a piece of burning coal with the intention of throwing it at someone else, but we're obviously the ones ending up getting hurt. So the attitude of letting go is about the freedom, the recognition that we can release and let go. And so this tendency is not limited to destructive or unproductive emotions, but we have these same tendencies of holding on in all kinds of areas of our lives. How often do we hold on to old ideas or beliefs as if they somehow need to be protected? We do the same thing here. We hold on to them out of a fear of letting go. We fear that if we let them go, we as a person are defeated, or we lose part of our identity. So we confuse these ideas with who we are, and we hold on to them even when they actually get in the way of our own growth and learning and openness. We talked about this in the attitude of the beginner's mind. So we do need to have our values and our beliefs and stand up for them sometimes, but we also need to be able to let go when it's time, get out of our own way, and make room for growth and openness. Or how often do we hold on to things and situations that we like? We get attached to these pleasant situations and circumstances, and we try to force them to stay. We try to grasp onto them. But does that actually make them any more pleasurable? Does it make them stay any longer? This is the insight of letting go. It's the invitation to actually stay open and to be with these pleasant things and to enjoy them while they last, and dropping the attachment so that we don't get depressed when they change, which they inevitably will. Or how often do we fixate on certain outcomes, stubbornly insisting that things turn out according to our personal preferences? And how often do we live with that expectation that something in the future will bring us happiness, whether it's status or money or another person, not realizing that we're postponing our happiness in the present moment. We're putting it off into the future with certain conditions. And so again, it's not that we should not have any life goals or that all of these things should be avoided. Relationships, for example, as we know, can be a tremendous sense of meaning and well-being and happiness. But it's about the realization that attachment and this clinging and grasping, it actually gets in the way of what makes us happy. So this, I believe, is the key misunderstanding, is that we feel that if we let go, we can't have what we want. That unless we cling and strive and grasp, we won't get anywhere. When in fact, often the opposite is the case. That people who live with a sense of openness and a habit of letting go are often highly effective. So when we're talking about letting go, we're not talking about letting go of our dreams or letting go of progress. We're talking about letting go of attachments. And this goes all the way back to the core teachings of the Buddha. In what's called the Four Noble Truths, this attachment is identified as the root cause of suffering. So we suffer because we have this clinging toward things that are pleasant and this aversion toward things that are unpleasant. And we have this behavior because we think it'll make us happy, but actually it doesn't. And we know this at some point. We know this to be true, but we ignore it. This is ignorance, avidya. So it's like we forget or ignore that we are holding on, and we're holding on to a piece of burning coal which hurts, but we do it anyways. And so this attachment is a form of addiction. In fact, the very definition of addiction is continued use despite adverse consequences. And this is exactly what we're doing. We're holding on despite the adverse consequences that comes from this grasping and this attachment. So in a sense, the practice of letting go is a practice of non-addiction. It can be an antidote. It can be a method of getting unhooked. And so how does this work? So let's take a look under the hood at the mechanics of addiction for a second. And the work of Judson Brewer, who is a psychiatrist and neuroscientist, shows how we can hack the brain's ancient reward system through mindfulness. And the research finding shows that this attitude of mindfulness and curiosity actually beats willpower when it comes to overcoming destructive behaviors. And so the basic mechanics of addiction is as follows: that we have something that alerts us. We have what's called a trigger, which triggers a behavior that leads to a reward. And this mechanism is there for our survival, is there to help us, is there to reinforce behaviors that help us survive. So let's say we have something that alerts us. We have a predator, let's say, hunting us. This is a trigger for a behavior of hiding or running away, which leads to a reward of surviving, of these endorphins maybe kicking in as we can relax again. Or we have a trigger of hunger. We feel starvation, and this triggers the behavior of looking for food, and then the reward of feeling satisfied and getting full and surviving. But this ancient reward system actually also can work against us, especially in our modern society. So let's say we're feeling anxiety. This is a trigger for a behavior because we want to get rid of anxiety. And often what we do to get rid of unpleasant things is we either suppress, repress, express, or escape. Right? So we want to get rid of that trigger. And so we turn to a behavior that is often about one of these four strategies. So we might, for example, turn to food and have a chocolate cake to address the anxiety. We might light a cigarette, or we might distract ourselves with our mobile device, whatever it is. And this leads to a reward. It's a dopamine rush in our brain, and we feel happy. We escaped the anxiety. But of course, we haven't addressed the anxiety, so the trigger is still there, and it just ends up reinforcing this vicious cycle of destructive behaviors. And the point here is that letting go can be used to hack this same primal reward system. And it can be used as an alternative to the good old willpower in trying to combat our desires. Because willpower is often less effective than we'd like to admit. And I think we can all relate to the fact that willpower is exhausting and it often runs out, and there's often a sense of guilt and shame when our willpower is depleted and we can't do what we set out to do, for example. So how does this letting go work? So we have the same trigger, right? We have the anxiety, but rather than suppressing, expressing, or repressing, or escaping, we're turning toward that anxiety. And so we're inhabiting curiosity, and that's the key. That's the key difference. We turn toward this anxiety with curiosity. We allow some space, some room for it. We allow it to be there because curiosity is inherently rewarding. Like, how does it feel when you become curious? And also what tends to happen is that once we become curious, we can start investigating and we can start seeing what's going on. How does it feel to be attached? We can start seeing that we're actually holding a piece of coal and that it hurts. And so this leads to a behavior of letting go. It's a spontaneous letting go. And this is also rewarding because we feel a sense of freedom. We feel that we are in control and we can become free of these attachments. So this can start creating a virtuous cycle that actually reinforces constructive behaviors and habits of letting go. So this attitude of letting go is not exclusive to mindfulness or to Buddhism. As we saw, it can be used in clinical settings in treating addiction. And there has been so many different books and techniques written about this topic and this principle and this philosophy of letting go. But what they all share, what they all have in common, in my estimation, is the principle of curiosity. It's this turning toward what's happening with a sense of curiosity, rather than trying to escape it or push it away or fight it. We turn toward it and we allow space, we allow it to be there, and we inhabit curiosity. So this process is, in a mindfulness frame, invited through the practice of rain, this rain meditation. And meditation helps this process also on a more general level by bringing attention and awareness to what's happening inside with a mindful and curious attention. And also simply paying attention to our breath reminds us of this principle and this attitude of letting go, because we realize that we have to let the breath go in order to make room for the next in-breath. It's kind of simple, but this holding our breath out of a fear of running out of oxygen is quite futile, right? So we have to let it go, and that is the trust and that is the freedom. In fact, the term nirvana in Sanskrit literally means to blow out. It's this sigh of relief and this freedom. So this practice of letting go is very simple, but is not necessarily easy. So I want to end by repeating that letting go is not a result of a decision, but it comes as a natural consequence of insight. So we don't have to beat ourselves up because we can't let go of our attachments all at once, right? This is not something we do once, but it's something that we practice doing over and over again as soon as we realize that we're caught in the grips of our own attachments. And I think it's important to point out that this recognition when we're caught, when we're holding on, and when we're attached is a big achievement in and of itself, because this is what turns to a trigger of curiosity. So once we can turn this realization, the recognition of attachment, into a curiosity, we can start getting this virtuous cycle going. And this is a cycle that is naturally rewarding, and it leads us toward freedom.